This video is sponsored by War Thunder. This is the Communist Concorde. It's arguably the biggest waste of money in aviation history because it was built purely for propaganda purposes. Dubbed Concordski in the West, the Soviet Tupolev Tu-144 was never intended to be a passenger jet in the way that Concorde was. It was just impossible. This airplane was built for one simple reason: to be the first supersonic commercial jet to fly, and the Soviets did win the bragging rights to that claim. But if you put that aside, the first Tu-144 was so bad that the second version of the airframe was essentially a completely different aircraft. Now don't get me wrong, even though this aircraft is over half a century old, it looks like it's from the future. It resembles a giant bird during landings, with a nose that's designed to slide down to give pilots the ability to see the ground. It was also the last passenger jet to be equipped with parachutes, and the only passenger jet to ever be fitted with ejection seats. But why the Soviets were never really capable of building a passenger supersonic jet in the 1960s, in the 1980s, or even today, why the Tu-144 was not a carbon copy of Concorde, and how Canards precipitated the crash of the Tu-144 during the Paris Air Show is not what you think. Just like many technological advancements during the Cold War, politics was at the heart of the Tu-144's story. In the 1960s, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev learned about the West's desire to build a supersonic commercial aircraft, the Concorde. Meanwhile, the American Boeing and Lockheed were also working on their designs, the Boeing 2707 and the Lockheed L-2000. The pressure was immense, thus the Soviets had no time to lose. Just like with putting the first man into space, they had to be the first to put a new supersonic passenger jet in the air. Back in the 1960s, the faster the aircraft, the more successful it was deemed. For this reason, the Communist Party demanded Tu-144 to fly with a speed of somewhere between 2,300 to 2,700 kilometers per hour, at least 4,000 miles, so it can travel from Moscow to Khabarovsk. The problem was that at that speed, the aircraft's skin would warm up to 356 degrees Fahrenheit, which made the goal of building such aircraft unrealistic. But not to the best of Soviet aviation designer Andrei Tupolev, who was tasked with overseeing the project. So much money and effort was thrown at the plane that the Tu-144 had to succeed. Officially, the Tu-144 project began in 1963 by the Tupolev Bureau. At the time, Tupolev had experience in building military supersonic bombers. But to build a supersonic passenger jet was a much bigger challenge. Reliability, safety, and comfort had to be on a whole other level. Military aircraft fly supersonic for short periods of time to outrun hostile areas. But supersonic passenger jets would have to fly supersonic non-stop. This meant that the aircraft had to be efficient. For this reason, the aircraft had no vertical stabilizers, since it was tailless. The downside of such design was that traveling below supersonic speed meant that it was harder to control the aircraft. As a result, in order for pilots to learn how to control a tailless aircraft, the Soviets had to modify a MiG-21 that featured the same wing design as the Tu-144, without stabilizers. Being tailless made the Soviet jet look a lot like Concorde, which sparked a lot of controversy. Westerners believed that the Soviets were technologically inferior and that the only way they could design a supersonic aircraft was by stealing the designs of Concorde. But that's a severely exaggerated claim. Yes, the KGB was spying on the Concorde program, because guess what? That's what spies do. But regardless, the Soviets solved multiple problems on their own, especially on the inside of the aircraft. The Soviets had less sophisticated solutions for the interior of the aircraft compared to the answers that Concorde's engineers had come up with. While on the outside both aircraft looked similar, there were still many differences. The Tu-144 was slightly larger and wider, meaning that it could carry more passengers. The engines were stacked all together on the Tu-144, compared to the engines being split between two compartments on the Concorde. And the later versions of the Tu-144 featured Canards. Another major difference was the landing gear. Tu-144 had 12 wheels attached in 3 rows, compared to just 4 wheels on the Concorde. That's because Concorde was designed to fly between world flagship airports like New York to London, while the Tu-144 was envisioned to be a workhorse, flying between rustic Soviet airports, which were pretty rugged. Soviets put the landing gear through a series of tests, especially through a wetted runway, to make sure it was durable enough and that engines were able to handle water ingestion. And in case of landing gear failure, the Soviets practiced multiple evacuation scenarios. The first Tu-144 was even equipped with ejection seats, in case something went wrong. You can see the open hatches from which the pilots would eject, in case of emergency. The Tu-144 was also faster, with a top speed of Mach 2.29 versus Concorde's Mach 2.04. Tupolev also flew higher than Concorde, at 65,000 feet compared to 59,000 feet. The Tu-144 had its first flight on December 31, 1968, which was 2 months prior to the Concorde's first flight. Soviet propaganda portrayed the Tu-144's first flight as a huge triumph that lasted 38 minutes. But even prior to the first flight, the Soviet engineers already knew that the plane was subpar. The Tu-144 first went supersonic on June 5, 1969, 4 months before that of Concorde. However, the Concordski wasn't the first commercial jet to break the sound barrier. In fact, it was an American Douglas DC-8. On August 21, 1961, during a test flight to evaluate a new leading-edge design for the wing, a DC-8 broke the sound barrier at Mach 1.012 while in a controlled dive through 41,000 feet and maintained supersonic speed for 16 seconds. And just like that DC-8 made history, you can make your own mark in the skies with War Thunder, the sponsor of this video. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made and is available now for free on PC and consoles. What's cool about this game is that all vehicles are modeled realistically, down to their individual components, like the crew, fuel tanks, and weapons. This means that when you shoot at the enemy, the X-ray view shows you exactly what's been hit, so you can adjust your next fire accordingly. War Thunder features a comprehensive customization system with countless camouflages, historical markings, and decorations for all types of vehicles, including community-created customizations. Whether you're new or a returning player who hasn't played in 6 months, click the link below and you'll receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. It's a limited time offer, so don't miss it. A big problem with the first Tu-144 airframe was that packing all 4 engines together generated severe vibrations. This made the landings and takeoffs quite sketchy. In addition, the wings did not generate enough lift, and the aircraft was 20 tons overweight compared to the original design requirements. The engines were also incredibly inefficient, but more on that later. The combination of all these problems prevented the airplane from accomplishing its original goal of reaching Khabarovsk, which was 4,000 miles away. The practical range of the first Tu-144 was just under 1,800 miles. For reference, Concorde had over double the range, at 4,500 miles. This is why Tupolev had to redesign a new airframe. The Tu-144S was essentially a brand new airframe and had its maiden flight in 1971. It featured much larger and completely redesigned wings. The engine placement was changed to 2 separate compartments in order to reduce vibrations. The new smaller landing gear with 8 wheels were stored within the engine compartments. The jet was also made bigger and wider, which allowed it to carry 150 passengers. While the redesigned Tu-144S was much better than the prototype, it was 15 tons heavier than the first airframe and still featured the original inefficient engines. Tu-144S was only able to travel about 2,200 miles instead of the original goal of 4,000 miles. The Soviets added canards to the Tu-144S, something that Concorde didn't have. The canards would only retract during takeoff and landing in order to increase lift in the front of the aircraft. Canards gave the Tu-144S an aerodynamic advantage over the Concorde in terms of low speed, lift, and stability. But there were also some disadvantages. The canards not only increased the complexity of the aircraft, but also its weight. In fact, the serial production model Tu-144S weighed 97 tons, 33 tons heavier than the original design called for. Speaking of canards, they arguably precipitated the crash of the Tu-144S during the Paris Air Show in 1973. You see, the Soviet canards were deemed pretty advanced at the time, so the French decided to fly a Mirage aircraft to spy on the Concordski from above and take pictures of the canards in flight. Unaware of this, when the Mirage suddenly appeared from the cloud above, it's believed that the pilots took drastic measures to avoid collision, so they violently pitched Concordski down. This overstressed the aircraft and broke it apart mid-flight. While officials never fully revealed what caused the crash, it appears that both the French and Soviet swept the investigation under the rug in order to avoid embarrassment for both countries. International prestige was only part of the reason why the Soviets built the Tu-144. At the time, the market for supersonic passenger jets was estimated to be worth billions of dollars, and the Soviet Union wanted to have a part in it. The Soviets claimed that 20 foreign airlines wanted to buy the Tu-144. But in reality, even Cuba didn't want the Communist Concorde, mainly because the jet couldn't even reach Cuba without refueling. The passenger flights began in November 1, 1977, with Tu-144S flying a 2,000-mile journey weekly between Moscow and Almaty in Kazakhstan. The number of passengers was capped at 80 instead of the 150 capacity, and the cruising speed was set just above Mach 2. This was the only route that the Tu-144S flew. Flying to the other 18 Soviet airports capable of hosting Tu-144 was not feasible, either due to range limitations or issues with sonic booms. The Soviets portrayed flying on Tu-144 as a luxury experience, with cognac and caviar being served to the passengers. Propaganda claimed that every passenger inside the aircraft felt like an astronaut. And they did, because of the noise. You see, while traveling at cruise speed of Mach 2, inside the cabin would get incredibly loud. This was partly due to engine noise, and partly due to the air conditioning units. At Mach 2, the airplane's fuselage would warm up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So without cool air inside the cabin, the passengers would have been cooked alive. The cabin noise measured at 90 to 95 decibel, which is as loud as a lawnmower. The passengers sitting next to each other could communicate by yelling, while passengers 2 seats apart could only communicate by passing notes to each other. The back of the airplane was even noisier and was one of the reasons why the number of passengers was capped at 80. However, what made flying on the Tu-144 relatively cheap was not the cabin noise. The tickets were subsidized by the Soviet government. While Concorde's tickets cost around $975 at the time, the Tu-144 tickets cost around 68 rubles, which was about $100 at the time. In reality, the ticket sales didn't even cover the aircraft's fuel costs. It was all for show. But that show didn't last very long. On June 1, 1978, only 7 months after the start of the passenger service, Aeroflot withdrew the Tu-144S from service for 2 reasons. First was due to an accident that had happened a week earlier during a test flight of a new Tu-144D. There was a mid-flight fire that forced pilots to conduct an emergency landing, killing 2 of the crew. The second reason was that Concordski was extremely unreliable. In total, Aeroflot conducted 102 scheduled flights, during which there were 226 malfunctions, and 80 of those were serious enough to cancel or delay the flight. During 7 months of service, 55 passenger flights took place, carrying only 3,284 passengers. Concordski was never even capable of achieving what Concorde did, which was carrying over 3 million passengers over 27 years. The only reason the Soviets flew passengers inside the Tu-144 was to show that they could, purely for political reasons. Here's the thing. The Tu-144 project was deemed to be 10 to 15 years ahead of what the Soviet aviation industry was capable of at the time. And that's mostly because of engines. Concorde was the first aircraft with engines that were completely controlled by a computer. In order to make sure that Concorde's engines operated as efficiently as possible, the computer would constantly change the shape of the inlets. This is how Concorde managed to burn about 20 tons of fuel per hour, compared to the Tu-144, which consumed almost double that. A big reason why the Tu-144 consumed so much fuel was that its NK-144 engines had to use afterburners to sustain a speed of Mach 2. Without the use of afterburners, the aircraft would immediately decelerate to about Mach 1.6. At the time, the NK-144 engines were quite primitive, especially compared to Concorde's Rolls-Royce Olympus 593 engines. For instance, the Soviet engines lacked reverse thrust. This is why the Tu-144 had to use parachutes during landing. Of course, the Soviets realized that they needed better engines from the start, and they were working on it. The problem was that the replacement engine, the RD-3651A, kept failing during the tests. Besides being fuel-hungry, the original NK-144 engines had another massive problem. The continuous use of afterburners to sustain Mach 2 flight severely shortened the engine's lifespan. The original engines had a life expectancy of just 50 hours, meaning that after the aircraft flew for 50 hours, it needed 4 brand new engines. But those engines didn't even last for 50 hours early on, and the first 3 Tu-144s went through a total of 27 engines during test flights. The engines just kept breaking apart. The Soviets continued to upgrade the NK-144 engine to get more life out of it, first to 100 hours and then to 200 hours of service life. Finally, after a decade of delays, in 1978, the new engine, the RD-3651A, was ready. This engine didn't require the use of an afterburner to sustain Mach 2 flight, making it much more fuel efficient. It consumed 26 tons of fuel per hour, which was still more than Concorde's. Along with the new engines, the Soviets introduced a new version of the supersonic aircraft, the Tu-144D, where D stands for Dorabotnie, meaning finished. Finally, 14 years after the first flight of the original Tu-144, the Tu-144D, equipped with new engines, was able to reach Khabarovsk, which was 4,000 miles away, in 3 hours and 23 minutes. But the new RD-3651A engine was not without problems. In 1980, at an altitude of 55,000 feet, the engine turbine disc disintegrated, forcing the aircraft to make an emergency landing. The new engine's service lifespan was just 300 hours. The Soviets did eventually increase the engine's lifespan to 2,000 hours, but that still paled compared to Concorde's Olympus 593 engine, with a lifespan of 25,000 hours. The short service life was not limited to the engines. The Tu-144S airframe had a service life of only 500 hours, and the Tu-144D airframe had a service life of only 1,000 hours. In comparison, Concorde was designed for a lifespan of 45,000 hours. Out of 16 Concordski aircraft built, the most airframe reached only 497 hours of flight time, with the average hours accumulated across the fleet being just 269 hours per airplane. The fleet of Concords flew about 12,100 hours each on average over the lifespan of 27 years. Concordski was just a gimmick, nothing less, nothing more. The Soviets just wanted the bragging rights to say that they created the first supersonic commercial jet. And after 15 years of trying to make the aircraft work, they gave up and canceled the program in 1984. After the cancellation of the program, the Tu-144S flew limited resupply missions to Khabarovsk from time to time, and sometimes acted as flying laboratories. Concordski was used to study the ozone layer research program, as well as a simulator for the Buran space shuttle program. Then, in the 1990s, Russia partnered with NASA to conduct a high-speed research program with the help of a modified Tu-144LL. This modified aircraft used the very last airframe, which was built in 1981 and had only accumulated 87 hours of flight time. Since no working engines were left, 4 new NK-32 engines from a Soviet Tu-160 bomber were repurposed for the aircraft. NASA had installed various sensors and flight recorders inside the airplane in order to compare the real-world data of supersonic flight against their computer models. A total of 26 flights were conducted, with the last flight taking place in April 1999. As part of the program, 2 American test pilots were allowed to fly the Tu-144, one of whom was Rob Rivers. According to him, the Tu-144 and the Concorde are completely different airplanes. The Concorde is more sophisticated, but there are also many examples of sophisticated engineering on the Tu-144. Rob Rivers is the only person to pilot both the Concorde and the Tu-144 Concordski. Play War Thunder for free on PC or consoles using my link below. New and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack, including multiple premium vehicles and other goodies. It's a limited time offer, so don't miss it.